You're listening to the Concierge Coaches Show with Bruce Cameron and Wayne Fritz, only on LA Talk Radio.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another exciting episode of the Concierge Coaches Show here on LA Talk Radio. I'm Bruce Cameron. Wayne's not with us next week, but he'll be back real soon. So we are approaching the end of 2024, and my goodness, Christmas is coming up in a few weeks, and man, has it been an action-packed year. We have with us again today Dr. Susan Giddings. Susan, hello.
Hey, how are you doing?
Doing great. So folks, as some of you may know, Dr. Giddings and I do prison consulting, and man, some things have happened recently that so much has happened that we decided to do a podcast on it today because we want to share with everybody some of the things that are happening. So if you see this podcast a year from now, it's just going to be more of a historical reference of what happened in the Bureau of Prisons in December of 2024 and the early part of 2025. So without further ado, I guess let's get started on the material. So it appears that for various political reasons, or maybe even cost-cutting reasons, that the Federal Bureau of Prisons has decided to deactivate or close, but pick your poison there, several of the prison camps throughout the nation. And the first prison camp that was up for deactivation was the federal prison camp in Duluth, Minnesota. I want to start, Susan, by talking about Duluth because they're going to be the first ones to have to deactivate. The time pressure is on them right now as we speak. To clear the inmates out. And then later on, we'll talk about Morgantown or Pensacola or some of the other facilities that will probably have a longer timeline. And that makes all the difference in the world. And Susan and I are going to explain that. Shameless plug for Bruce Cameron. I myself was in a facility closure at Carville, Louisiana, Susan.
I remember.
Same thing happened. Kathy Hawk Sawyer shows up like a thief in the night and says, "Y'all got nothing coming." Not really, but she says, she was
much nicer about how she said it.
We're going to deactivate by this time. If you're a staff member, you can go here, or you can try to find somebody to pick you up. And good luck with that, right?
Yeah.
And
Carswell was activating, so we had a whole crew from come over.
So we had cars. You could put your crap. It's like R&D, like pack your shit. I mean, it's almost like being an inmate. So I put my crap in the education. I put my stuff in the Carswell, the Carswell room because I am a native Texan. I wanted to get home to my family, and so it was a good thing, right? For me, but it was there, or his Oklahoma Transfer Center, Three Rivers. Took our friend Mike and several others. I mean, Three Rivers, the joint. We're not talking, we're talking, Anyhow.
Yep.
Nonetheless. Okay. Back to these closures. Susan, what are some of your initial thoughts about the closures?
So I'm not surprised. Let's start with that. One of the projects I actually worked on while I was in DC was auditing bed space nationwide, and the combination of, even before COVID, the number of individuals in the camps, the numbers were dropping. Probably more of a function of just how the laws have changed and some of the reforms that have been put in place. And you think back to like 2012, the Bureau was peaking at around 219,000 individuals in custody. And by that number had come down quite a bit. And then we had COVID. And of course, the bulk of the folks that benefited with home confinement under the CARES Act were minimum security and then low security
Right.
folks. Those folks that were living in that open bay style living, because obviously the germs kind of floated around everywhere. And so if you had health issues or you were older, you were at risk.
Right.
We couldn't really socially distant.
Right.
So that happened. And of course, then during COVID, we were still in COVID when we started applying time credits. And again, the bulk of the impact is at that minimum security and then low security level.
Right.
And we were seeing camps, satellite camps, especially if they were those Care 1 healthy populations, where they had no other programs. They didn't have an RDAP. They didn't have anything else. Just struggle. I mean, there were institutions, satellite camps that had 40 and 50 folks. And that was, and that, you know, and those satellite camps, they're there as a workforce.
Right.
For the main institution, to mow the grass and handle
Right.
the house and handle the garage. And, but they still got to eat.
Right.
So, but yeah, I was seeing numbers, and even before the pandemic, and I was like, it's only a matter of time before somebody says, "Hey, Bureau."
Right.
What
so
do you do?
I know that we're going to have some family members watching this. So let's kind of cut to the chase with Duluth for the moment. So Duluth is under pressure to close within several months from now.
Less than 2.
Okay. Less than 2. Now, a lot of people, I'll go. I initially thought that people with 2025 release dates were going to be kind of encouraged to go to an RRC. Well, you know, and then you and I had you kind of, and I'm not a case management person, but you alerted me like, hey, inmates after a certain date in 25, they're just going to have to go elsewhere. So kind of talk to our audience about that, Susan, because of I guess it's because of the shortened time frame. A lot of guys with 2025 release dates are still going to get shipped.
So just the process to refer someone to halfway house, and that's just getting the paperwork out of the institution, is not, it's multiple documents. It's multiple departments are involved. So there's not a fast track. You still have to have medical clearance, psychology clearance, dental clearance. You also have to have wants and warrants checks to make sure there's nothing else going on. Progress report, supervised release plan, all these documents come together into an RRC referral. From there, once it's all gathered, then it's got to go through all the different hands that touch it and review it before the warden hits the button and it goes to the RRM. Even a fast track for that paperwork is 2 weeks. And that's fast. I would put it more like 2 to 4 weeks.
And that's getting it out of the institution. That's not the region.
That's like from the day it starts to the day it leaves the institution.
Right.
2 to 4 weeks. I mean, yes, you can do it in less. And we've had this conversation with folks when they call. The average case manager at any given time in a minimum security facility, a full institution like Duluth is, right? They're going to have upwards of 30 halfway house packets that they're working through at any given time. It's just the nature of prison camps. I can remember back to our Seymour Johnson days, we brought in and released 500 to 600 inmates every single year. They weren't the same 500 that came in that went out, but we were turning that population. And that is the nature of it. So now you're not looking at 20 or 30, but 500, 600, 700.
Right.
There's just no way. And again, of that population, and I don't have the numbers, but I would put money on 20% of that population has a release date in 2025, either a straight up release date or with their FSA with the conditional, talking 20%. There's just no way with the timeline they're working on that gets done. Right. So those folks go into transit. And on the other side, on the pickup side, those new unit teams, they're going to be teamed within that 28 days. That new unit team is going to look at, was there a recommendation made? Where's the paperwork? What's done? And they're going to pick the ball up from there.
Right. And they'll just release from that institution, wherever it may be, you know. And so we've certainly heard about Sheridan, Oregon, and Three Rivers, and maybe a couple of other places that may be places where some of these folks get moved to, because that's where the beds are. And and I know that there's in a perfect world, we don't want inmates more than 500 miles from their home. But I think during these special times that I think they're just going to go with where the bed. I mean, they're going to try to look at that, right? But
and that's true even with the First Step Act. So, you know, after the First Step Act passed, there was a lot of folks who were like, it says 500 miles. It does, but then read the next sentence or read the second half of the sentence. They caveated, Congress caveated that 500-mile rule.
That's right.
The only thing it does is for those folks who were inside 500 miles already prior to the First Step Act, they stayed put. Since the First Step Act, if they're at 490, 450, and there's something closer, they can move again. That was really the only change, because it's heavily caveated with bed space, medical issues, security issues, levels, everything.
That's a good point, you know. So yeah, as it pertains to Duluth, so here it is, like you said, just with a really quick closure rate. And usually you get the inmates out first, and then the staff are kind of left.
Got to pack everything up. The equipment gets packed, the files, everything gets transferred.
So that means get the inmates out, means get the inmates out. That's the way it worked at Carville, and I'm sure at other facilities. So
did you have this kind of timeline at Carville?
Well, Seymour Johnson still was still in business when you left it?
It was still in business when I left. I was actually oh my gosh, I was at USP Lee, I believe, which was funny because they announced it as saying some of our older prison camps. And I was like, well, wait a minute. That's where I was. But at that point, it was about 15 years old. But of course, Seymour Johnson was located on the military base. Right. So it wasn't the Bureau's facility.
It was kind of like a Pensacola or whatever, where, you know, we have an arrangement with the military Department of Defense to have the facility there. So, but that's good that you had that experience. I was there TDY for a minute, but you had that experience working in a freestanding facility like a Pensacola, like a Montgomery, and that's just you know. And so then I surviving this Carville thing. So we have some familiarity with what's going on here. Now, if there's something else about the Duluth folks, you know, just say a prayer for these folks. Hopefully, you know, that that there's some, you know, whoever can get a halfway house can get that referral, and then the time frame, if not, that they get transferred to a facility that is possibly close to where they're going, but at least the staff are friendly, and that will help them with their
I
release.
think with the current timeline, unless their paperwork has already left the institution and they had a requested date within that window, I think they're moving.
Yeah.
You know, and that's rough. And it's, you know, and it's rough for all parties. The staff weren't expecting it. The population wasn't expecting it. Certainly their family members weren't expecting it. But, you know, there has been some sunshine. As you know, as you and I have talked about, there's a lot of folks there that weren't close to home. And they were going to need to wait 12 to 18 months for a regular routine near release transfer. You and I know of at least a half a dozen or so that they're moving closer.
And you know,
and it's because they would have gotten to move closer, but they would have had to wait the 12 to 18 months. Right.
And I think another common denominator here for some of the folks is RDAP, the Residential Drug Abuse Treatment Program. There's RDAPs, you know, some of these camps, Morgantown, Pensacola, you know, has a well-known RDAP or whatever. And now, right, the institutions that have RDAP programs, and now with their respective closures, and I'm just going to say ballpark guess, like Pensacola is going to be 5-6 months or whatever. Could be less, could be more. I don't know. It's just
so. What we're hearing with the Duluth folks is those that are in the program, they're moving to Yankton, and the Yankton folks who were in line for the next class are getting set back so they can bring in the cohort of RDAP folks out of Duluth that were mid-program. Is they're going to slide them in. There's several of them going to Yankton.
So will that be the case at Pensacola to Montgomery?
That would be an easy. I mean, that would be logical.
Yeah,
that doesn't necessarily apply in government, but that would be a logical move.
Right. And there's, one thing is, and even from a case management perspective, like with a Morgantown or a Montgomery, some of those guys maybe could graduate a little early, right? Or not, maybe not. But then, and then how many?
I would imagine it's going to come down to where are they in the program.
Sure.
So
hands down, you just can't.
But there's four phases, 3 phases.
Yeah.
I can't remember.
So I'll be right. Depending on how far along they are in the program, will dictate if they have to go somewhere else and finish it. So, that's some interesting times ahead with these closures. Any more thoughts on the?
Not so much on Duluth, but I know there's been a buzz on your Facebook page about what about the other ones? What about Yankton? What about Montgomery? I know you and I have talked a little bit about that. I think Yankton's pretty safe. One of the reasons several years ago when President Trump was during his first administration, his budget included the closure of 2 satellite camps and 1 regional office is what he was proposing. And at the time I was in the regional office in Mid-Atlantic, and there was a lot of discussions between myself and my counterparts in the other region about who was going to be on the chopping block. And Yankton was one of them. And Yankton actually at the time the community was so concerned. Their congressman was out there heavily talking about, and their senators were heavily talking about why Yankton needed to stay open. It's not close to any other facilities. It's really the only one in that kind of upper northwest U.S. area. Yep. And
it would be devastating to the town.
It would
devastate
be absolutely
the economy. And that was kind of our thing, right?
Right. Our thought was President Trump has a good relationship with the governor of South Dakota, actually with both South and North Dakota. And just based on that, I think that's going to give them some insulation in terms of the decisions. And the Bureau doesn't make those decisions on their own. There's conversations with Maine Justice, and then Congress is notified, and then things happen very quickly. But I think that's going to be one of those instant that I think that at least in the short term, we'll see how things go. Their population is being bumped up because of the Duluth folks, so they'll be at capacity and they can hold about 500.
That's right.
A little over 500.
They can hold them, and they can hold them. They have the capacity.
And they have the space for them.
They have the space.
And Montgomery provides a lot of support to the military. People don't realize that when these institutions that were co-located on military bases, and Pensacola is smaller than Montgomery, they provide a lot of MWR, landscaping, mow the grass, spread mulch, things that if they're doing it, then a contractor's not doing it, or a military member's not doing it. And so it is a win-win financially for the military to have the federal inmates doing that kind of stuff. And Montgomery being a larger facility than Pensacola was. It's also a little bit further inland. Those Gulf, there were more facilities along that that coast, and of course those get subject to damage. If you remember years ago, FBC Homestead leveled. So Montgomery being where it is, it's a little bit more inland. It's a little bit out of the the hurricane
Mm-hmm.
alley, so to speak. So
Yeah.
it's got a few things going for it. So I think, at least for right now,
Right.
and it's going to come down to, are we utilizing, or I should say the Bureau utilizing the space they have effectively?
Right.
You
Right.
know,
Effectively. So, and then, is it cost effective? Inmate, per inmate, contraband. If it was more difficult to maintain a pure prison environment with the flexibility of contraband and the lack of security at these facilities. So, there's a lot of other things we could go into. We're not going to do that, but because I want to get into so the first thing was announced was these closures, and then right on the heels of that, President Biden decides to offer clemency to about 1,500 inmates, right?
right.
And so, and many of these inmates, and it's really interesting because on the Facebook group, there's a lot of people saying, my name is on the list and I've got nothing coming on the locator center. So I want you to explain that here in a minute.
Sure, absolutely. So the process,
yeah.
One thing is a lot of folks don't know the difference between a pardon and a commutation.
Commutation. Right.
So technically a clemency is just, hey, we're showing some mercy at the presidential level, as far as that goes. Mm-hmm. But the pardons are a complete kind of wiping of your record. Like, everything's gone. You're restored as if your conviction never happened. Clemency, or what is locally referred to as clemency, but a commutation of sentence, is a sentence reduction, which can be anywhere from a fixed amount, take you from life down to 30 years, right? A non-parolable life to something, all the way down to an immediate release. Those clemencies are different. So what happens is kind of the Bureau is looped in that it's going to be coming, but it has to come from the White House first. Like, the Bureau can't jump the gun.
Right.
So as soon as the White House announces it, the notices are sent, and it kind of works its way down. I was in the regional office when President Obama was issuing multiple clemencies for weeks in a row, and I had to keep track of them, because what happens is
it a blanket 5 years, or different people get
it's different? It depends on the individual. Some folks are going to get an immediate release. Some are going to get 5 years off their sentence, or they may get a sentence reduction, but the sentence reduction puts, with their good conduct time and everything, is still a de facto immediate release. But it's going to be different. The other things that can happen is, depending on how the actual order is written, it may say that the sentence is commuted to be released in 14 days. So it's an immediate release, but it's 14 days, because even with a commutation of your sentence, the Bureau is still required to do a whole bunch of community-based notifications, whether that's law enforcement notifications or victim notifications or any number of things. The other thing that can happen is a commutation can be can be conditional. In this case, we're not seeing those, but in the Obama administration, individuals were given commutations of sentence if they agreed to participate in the residential drug abuse program. So their commutations reduced their sentence, but they still had like 2 years out, because they were supposed to enroll in the program. So what we did is the notices come, and there's a signature page for the person getting the clemency, and they have to sign for it. Because if there's conditions or whatever the case is, they sign for it. Those all have to come back up through the chain for the Bureau, because then the Bureau has to advise the pardon attorney, hey, he's been notified. Or in the case of, like, with the Obama administration, the RDAP program, the individual agreed to participate, and we were certifying to the pardon attorney that yes, they agreed to participate.
Right. And so not everybody's clemency is going to look the same. For instance, I believe you and I have a client that the gentleman had a sizable time left on his sentence, but he still has to do like 4 months, right? Remember? And he was kind of confused, like, well, they're saying I have 4 more months. And
he hadn't even seen his clemency, or he hadn't even seen his clemency yet. So, and then once we had talked to him and he was kind of doing the math in his head, and he was like, okay, then I probably got a 5-year reduction. That math works out. So, right. Yeah.
If indeed. So yeah, we're kind of going backwards and so for this
Reverse
gentleman,
engineer.
right. So why do you think some of the, and you can take the fifth, but why do you think some of the folks haven't had anything on their locator center? Just haven't gotten to them yet?
It could, well, we know some of them have been released already.
Yes.
But now the locator center, there is a delay. So the commutation doesn't even get calculated until the individual signs for their clemency. Because again, it'll say about, it'll reduce their sentence, but still maintain their term of supervision. They have to be given notice, and technically they have to accept the clemency. Again, logically, folks aren't going to turn it down, but depending on the conditions, they could choose to, right? So they have to accept it. Then the computations are redone, but there's always that lag time. So in the cases of those who are looking at immediate or very quickly, like this week, obviously it came in late last week.
Right.
By the time it appears, they're gone. Because again, inside the agency, they already have that. They're already calling these folks back to the halfway house to turn in their ankle monitors and things like that. So by the time it appears, they're gone.
Right.
So
that's true. And so maybe by the end of this calendar week,
we'll see.
At least those will be updated on the locator center. Maybe.
And like I said, in recent years, the pardon attorneys office has been giving some lag time because of the fact that these notifications that are still legally required have to be accomplished. That used to not be the case, that you just have staff like flying around trying to get things done and faxing notifications and such, and you'd have 6 in an institution, and the staff were spinning around a little bit trying to get everything done and not screw something up.
So, and I'm not sure of the route. It goes from the pardon attorney to the institution, the inmate signs for it, it goes back up to the pardon attorney's office down to Grand Prairie.
Yes. Yeah. Well, no, it kind of happens once they sign for it. Individual, there'll be actually a pardon attorney, an order from the president, and it will have the list of names on it. But then individually, each person individually is getting that notice and signing for it. So one of the things that like I had to do when there was the conditioned ones was I had to keep track, and the institutions were letting me know, okay, our 4 are done, our 10 are done, or whatever it was. And I had, because again, instead of one massive one, this one was huge. It's not uncommon for a president to issue multiple lists right up until inauguration.
Oh, and by the way, so the list, it's done, right? Or are there more people coming, or we don't know?
We don't know, but the administration has signaled that they are going to be looking at additional cases. In the case of President Obama, his last orders were issued the morning of January 20th because he's president. Yeah, he's president until noon with the officials switching over. So yeah, our last orders, and I had literally a folder for each order, making sure all the paperwork was done and crossing their names off, and yeah.
So yeah, it
was
amazing.
A hectic time.
Somebody was asking on our group, why don't they do this in the beginning of an administration?
This is, actually, if you're paying attention, there are pardons and things offered during an administration. They just don't get the attention because they're happening in 1s and 2s. It's that lead up to the end, and not if they won. Like it's the lead up to the end when you're leaving. Mm-hmm. This is your last thing you get to do before you walk out the door. Right. Now, a lot of the individuals who were granted in this first batch had been released under the CARES Act. They've been out in home confinement for a year, up to 3 years plus. We saw several of people we've been working with that got it. And it made sense. If you've been out on home confinement for that long, and you're doing fine and you're working and you're taking care of your family and you're staying clean and you're not getting in trouble, it makes sense.
It makes complete sense.
Yes.
For
And
people
they're bogging the system up.
And they're clogging the system up. And so yet again, yes, this was designed for people that were out specifically on CARES Act home confinement.
A lot of them were.
So Biden initiated the CARES Act home confinement exodus from the institutions to the RRC / home confinement, thus creating this backlog or a kind of a flooding presence in the halfway house. And it's just not like the halfway house can create more staff or create more bed space.
It actually started, the CARES Act was actually passed under President Trump's administration. Yeah. We were releasing the first folks in like April.
Really?
Yeah.
So Trump was still in office when folks were rolling out to the RRCs?
Yeah, it was in those first group, but it continued, you know.
I see.
We were back people were back to work, and we were still releasing the last of the CARES Act. Folks that went out under the CARES Act were approved, like I think it was May to June of 2023, were when the last referrals were considered. And those folks left like June, July, which some might argue that was extended longer than it needed to be. Yeah, we were putting people out under CARES Act for over 3 years.
Yeah. So that's a significant number of folks, and several of those folks had significant time left to do, as in
30,
28 to 2031 or whatever. Yeah, 20.
Yeah.
So that is quite a long haul to be in a community placement. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. It's
unbelievable.
They were still having to come back and forth to the to the halfway houses to check in. Their movement was still limited in terms of like what they could do. So, they worked and they came home and they went to church or doctor's appointments. And that was pretty much like the extent of their lives. And long term, that's not a real good strategy. No. You kind of put people in a position to at some point screw up, even though they don't mean to. So
I know some folks are like, hey, I've been on home confinement. Why am I not on the clemency list? It's like, well,
we know that the Pardon Attorney's Office had reached out to the Bureau, and to some extent, we don't have those details in terms of identifying lists of individuals that were out under the CARES Act. But we saw people that were not under the CARES Act also be granted clemency. So that wasn't the only driver.
So there are some people that weren't CARES Act that got clemency this go around.
Yeah. Yeah. So, there were a lot that had been released under CARES Act. There really were.
But were they in RRCs or still in joints?
Well, I don't have the breakdown.
I know you don't.
But I know, but it's not uncommon to have the bulk of the individuals that are toward the tail end of their sentence.
Right.
So the ones we're seeing have not been institution released, but that doesn't mean there isn't, and that doesn't mean more aren't coming. I mean, I think you and I have said on the Facebook group multiple times, can't win if you don't play, fill out the paperwork. Don't depend on your name being on the list that was gathered, do the paperwork.
So now are there people that were on CARES Act home confinement and they were found to be of a less security risk to get out there, but yet they weren't on the clemency list?
And again, we don't know what the Pardon Attorney's Office was looking at when they reached out to the Bureau to pull lists together, right? You also had folks who went out to halfway house and home confinement during that period of time with FSA credit. So they might be sitting there going, well, I've been out for more than a year. Why didn't I? They didn't go out under CARES Act and they just went out under SCA and FSA, even though they're sitting there and they went out during the same time period,
Right. But they're
Doesn't
methods.
mean they were
Right.
the same group. We had internally, we had assignments. We could run rosters and identify who was CARES Act and who was something else. So
yeah, definitely suffice it to say the CARES Act folks got the overwhelming
in at least in this first batch, yeah, absolutely.
First batch. And so, however, if you're listening to this show on our Facebook group here in a little while, and you're kind of outside the parameters, or you got out, or you got clemency, but you weren't CARES Act, or you were CARES Act and you didn't get clemency, your name's not on the list, please give us a call. Because we want to hear your situation, right? Because we're students of the federal system. We worked there a long time. We both retired there from there. So we've dedicated a lot of our adult lives, if not our entire adult lives, in some respect to the Bureau of Prisons. I know that's a sad commentary, but that's why we're here, right? Anyway,
we were babies when we started.
So what?
I said we were babies when we started. At least I was. You were a little older.
I know, right? It's amazing. I was talking to some folks, and a lot of things have changed, but man, this reduction in force thing is kind of going by the numbers at these institutions. I mean, it's going right like it used to be, like it always has. So certain things don't change. So,
but in terms of the clemency, we see it on the Facebook page. Like it doesn't cost money to apply. You don't need an attorney to apply. We have put the link out there. The online application is in Spanish and English. If you are someone who has been in halfway house and home confinement, regardless of the process, and you're doing well, you're staying out of trouble, you're working, you're doing all the things you're supposed to do, why wouldn't you try? Yeah. And I would even say for folks sitting in the institution, if you've served a chunk of your time, you've done good programming, you've been out of trouble, you've clear conduct, I can remember one of the cases I had many, many, many years ago, a female, she had been in prison for 7 years. And during that time, she got her high school diploma, she got her welding apprenticeship, she did all of these things. And when the opportunity came, this was under President Clinton, she was a great candidate. And she went from 14 to 7 years. They cut her time in half. But she had done the work while she was in prison to make her a good candidate. And I think that's important. And for those who don't get it, remembering that while you're doing your time, do good time.
What if my application says in process or whatever? Should I apply again? We get that question.
According to the website currently, it says if you have been denied, you can reapply. If you look at the actual application, the language is different. But again, we're at the end of an administration. This is what they do. I suspect that language will be updated afterwards. Because the form itself does say if you're denied, you have to wait a year. But the website currently says reapply.
Right.
So,
and now that we're entering, so that definitely, just go ahead and, we have links on the Facebook group, and we have plenty of links to the application.
Mm-hmm.
What about folks that are doing time? How do they get the application through legal library, or what's going on?
Law library should have them in quantity. Yeah. That was one of those. That was one of those things that's always there, but at this time of year, or I should say, in the pardon season, for lack of a better word, they're readily available.
Yeah. So that's
Supervisor of Education should have them in the law library.
All right. So they're available inside the institution. Otherwise,
I used to keep copies in my desk.
Right here. Let's pull it out. That's right. And if you're on home confinement or an RRC, you can get one online.
Absolutely.
And do you print it out and send it in, or can you fill it out? Is it fillable?
I didn't look. I found the information. We put it up. I did not look. I'd have to
I
go
need to
back
look
and look.
too. I know. I just put the links out there for everybody because everybody's wanting to know and stuff
Right.
like that. And so, oh man. So what a, here we go, right? Just facility closures. And again, that I just, because people see the pardon attorney, but I'm not getting a pardon, I'm getting clemency, but has a pardon attorney, right? And they're kind
Right.
of, it's really interesting,
It's
right?
and it's all handled in the same office. And if you're in the community, if you're in a halfway house or home confinement, there's a lot of details on the website about, when, the differences. There's a lot of educational material on the pardon attorney website.
And let's continuing on that. There's an affidavit, and the affidavit will spell out, right, on the clemency. It spells out what
you're asking for. And now we specifically, because the pardon application is different than the commutation of sentence, the reduction.
I'm just saying what the inmate gets if they've been granted clemency. Do they have an affidavit?
It's a form. I mean, that is notifying them. You mean that they've been granted?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's just like a memo. It says pardon attorney at the top, and it's just, a statement, and that would include any conditions if there were conditions.
Right, the conditions. But like you said, some of them said you'll be to be released on December 21st. So I think I saw one that said you're out of there.
Had a specific date. Yeah,
December 21st. So that, man, how great is that? So.
And that's where those differences go. Did it just reduce your sentence by 5 years or 10 years? Did it give you a specific out date? No one that I have heard so far, what I'm hearing is that kind of 14-day window to get the paperwork done. The other thing people don't realize is a lot of the institutions are located in some really remote areas. And in the case of, for instance, USP Lee, the bus out left at 6 o'clock in the morning. So if you weren't on the 6 a.m. bus, and I'm not talking like the Bureau, I'm talking about Greyhound. If you weren't on the 6 o'clock bus, like depending on what direction you were going, sometimes there was only one bus a day going east, and there might have been one or two going west, and they, so that was a big deal. Like from my experience, when I was a case manager and you were doing these immediate releases and you were trying to find, well, what's the next closest bus station? Because he's got to go 500-600 miles and the family can't get here.
Right.
So from a case manager standpoint, from getting the work done, I realize the folks that are serving the time, they just want to be done.
Right.
But from a case management perspective, having that couple of weeks to plan.
Right.
I remember having a case that literally we were on the phone with the family, figuring out what was the closest Greyhound bus station. The guy was releasing to New York, or not, to Michigan. That's all I remember. But we were like, well, how close are you to here? And how close are you to here?
Right.
Because we were driving him from Southwest Virginia up to Lexington, Kentucky, because they had more buses. And I was trying to find the closest place. And we were putting him on a bus like 8 o'clock at night because, again, had an immediate release.
Right.
And as opposed to giving the 7 to 14 days to do the paperwork, to schedule the release and the transfer, and because not everybody's family can come and get them.
Right. No. So it's always a struggle sometimes to get people out. So the thing that I'm kind of underscoring, folks, is long story short, everybody's situation is different. Everybody's situation is a little bit different, right? So there's that tendency that we want to compare ourselves to this guy. Well, I heard this dude got that. Well, this dude got that. And while that's interesting commentary, you got to look at your situation. What does your order say? What is your, what I mean? What's going on with you and your particular situation, or your loved one's particular situation? We get that all the time. Well, this guy got halfway house. Why didn't I? Well, is he in the same zip code as you? Does he live in the same street? Federal probate, just all these other mitigating things. No.
And the reality is the only case that exactly what it was involved in is your own. Because not everybody is necessarily completely forthcoming about their background for a variety of reasons. Whether it was jail credit or prior criminal history and these different things that go on. So just because on the surface, well, we arrived at the same day and we have the same sentence, maybe, you may not have the same credits going
Right.
on. And the only case you know is your own.
Right. Right.
You know, so
I know it's frustrating, and the rumor mill is one thing, and hearing these things. So just try to be patient and focus on your own case,
mhm.
and look at your sheets and your data sheets and your earn sheets, and kind of try to understand
Educate
what that
yourself.
means, what conditional release can mean on a good thing, but sometimes it's conditional. And so if that happened, you know what I mean? So
Absolutely.
we'll
And
say
and
that.
we're seeing that, like the new worksheets that came out mid-October has just created a lot of confusion.
Yeah.
I know if I had been in charge of the world, I probably would have done it a little different, but I'm not, and that's okay. Um,
Right.
but
No,
there is a lot of confusion, and that confusion, that instinct of I'm not getting what I'm entitled to. Why? Why are
right.
they picking
Well,
on
the
me?
sheet says this. The sheet said I'd already be out of prison. What's going on? And like, oh my gosh, well, this is why, because and having to explain that, and that's not getting explained to the inmates by case management staff or whatever. And this is so new,
Oh yeah,
as either
and
you
it's
said
so
or somebody said,
different
the bureau is building the plane as it
as they're
flies it.
flying it.
And so
That
it's kind
that
of,
was the running joke with myself and working with developers and some of the other folks. It's we're building it as we're flying it,
yeah,
and then they're constantly trying to improve, make it run
yeah,
faster,
they
make
are.
it better, to make sure that the folks who are participating in programming are getting,
And,
just the absolute
and to be fair,
benefit they
they have
should be
gotten better.
getting.
Like you said, as you noted the other day, we're not seeing the same mistakes that we're, so things are getting better. Improvements
Mhm.
are getting made. Is it quick enough? No, it's never quick enough. It's never accurate enough, and it's never enough. But we do see some positive trends. Things are kind of coming along.
And there's things coming.
Yeah. So
I
get
know our DC code offenders are very anxiously awaiting for that rollout, and that's coming. That's coming. I mean,
Yep.
DC could have written the law a little bit easier, and that would have made it a heck of a lot easier to implement. But that is being worked on, and that is coming in the near future.
It is.
So,
All right. So here we are at the 2-minute mark.
throw
Wow,
it in.
that was a quick show. I'm telling you, man, we're gonna do this probably another week or two. We'll do some other shows on some other topics.
Yeah,
Well, Susan, thanks for coming on the show today.
absolutely.
It's always a pleasure to have you. Thank you for your service and your continued participation in the Facebook group, and you've really helped a lot of families. What you bring to the table is, I think you're just the only one out there that has this kind of comprehensive scope and scale of knowledge, and so it's just a real blessing that you're involved with these folks. So, well, folks, you can see this show and all our other shows on Amazon. Audible now has it. We're on Apple Podcast, iHeartRadio. Of course, our shows are all archived on the LA Talk Radio site as well. So you can see all the videos. You can download the videos. You can listen to the videos. You can listen to the MP3 files. So we have all these different choices for you. So we really appreciate your support. And also a quick plug for our book, Unlocking Federal Time Credits. Hold on a minute. Oh, here we go. So you can tell I'm never far from a copy. Anyway, this thing here is an awesome resource for First Step Act, and it can also be mailed into the institutions, so you can have one at home and one in the institution and really understand what's going on. So I know a lot of people are going to be FSA eligible here, but if they're scoring down, this is going to be, or they're newly admitted into prison. This is going to be a big resource for you. All right, then. Well, anything else?
No.
I can be reached at conciergecoach.net. Yep. Our site is federalprisonauthority.com. And we have a Facebook group, Early Release Federal Prison First Step Act is our Facebook group. So with that, we'll bid everybody farewell. If we don't see you for Christmas, have a Merry Christmas, blessed Christmas, and a Happy New Year. But then again, we may be on next week. You never know. So take care, everybody. And we'll see you next time on the Concierge Coaches Show on LA Talk Radio. Bye, everybody.
You're listening to the Concierge Coaches Show with Bruce Cameron and Wayne Fritz, only on LA Talk Radio.